Okay guys, so we're back here. Now, the reason I'm doing this video is not just to show you how to replace the radiator in the 1FZ FE, is also to be very mindful of the type of radiator that you install. So here's the radiator that used to reside in my 80 series, and this is actually an aluminium top tank and a brass core cooler. And it's a 3-core, I believe, heavy duty, and this thing has lasted quite a long time. But trying to find an OEM replacement of equivalent build is a very tricky feat these days. So we're looking at some aftermarket options, and I think you'll see quite a lot these days on eBay, etc., trying to sell the likes. And what we want to try and avoid here is a low quality Chinese manufactured radiator that's going to bust on you pretty early into its life, and that's exactly what's happened to this one here. Plastic top tank, aluminium 3-core, and was manufactured in China but advertised as if it was a Koyo style radiator. So just be very, very mindful, guys. It probably comes without saying for a few of you to stay away from non-OEM equivalents unless you can get your hands on a very high quality aftermarket one, such as here in Australia we've got the Desert Coolers, Adrad, T-Rad I think it is, and I'm sure there's some other good ones out there, but I'm not aware of them. And that's all that we should be putting into these cars. So look, I've made the mistake, and I put a little bit too much trust into a marketing, I'll call it a marketing scam, and I paid the price. Now this thing has barely done 20 kilometers of drying before it busted a leak. Just ignore the seal around there. The leaking's actually occurred through the top tank. All the pressure that's built up prior to installation has just popped a crack all the way through, and she's history. So now I've got to pull it out, buy a new one and replace it, and we're going to go through how to do that. Okay, stage one of how to remove the radiator from your vehicle. And look, this will probably apply to most vehicles, but of course we are focusing on the 1FZ FE inside an 80 series Landcruiser. Now, I'll actually show you, you can actually see the white splatter marks on the hose there, top hose, side of the battery box, top there of the valve cover as well. There's probably, can't see it in video here, but you'll see a bit of white staining across here. That's all the red coolant that's actually splashed out, and I had no idea I had a leak until I finished driving, parked the car, and saw a nice big drip. So it pretty much shows that we're history with this radiator. So we're going to move into the first stage of how to remove it. Now, with these vehicles, you actually need to, first of all, put a cover down over your bull bar if you've got one, and your headlights. The last thing you want to be doing is banging into things, breaking things. So we need to remove this battery box here. Obviously, in order to do that, sorry, I've already made a start here. That's the positive terminal, that's the negative terminal there. I've already unscrewed them. Just use whatever size bolts you've got, shifting spanner, ratchets, sockets, whichever, doesn't matter. And once you've removed the negative first, pop that through there and push it out to the side. Do the same thing with your positive after that. That's obviously so we can pull the battery out. If you've got a battery clamp down, which you should, you need to obviously undo those as well. I think mine's only finger tight at the moment. And once you've finished loosening up the battery clamp for that, you should be able to pull it aside. A little bit more for this one. And that yellow stuff you can see, that's just terminal spray to protect the connections there, so don't worry about that. You probably got something similar on your vehicle, I'm sure. And this battery clamp can be very wet. Trying to avoid having to undo it all the way, but that's probably what I'm going to have to do with at least one of them. So we're just going to take this one all the way off. Probably should also be using some latex gloves for this guy as well. Keep your hands clean. These things can get pretty greasy. Anyway, so I've loosened that one up. Pull the battery out and just put it aside for now. Obviously, we're now looking with the inside of the battery box. A bit more light there, and we need to remove some bolts in order to do that. You should find a bolt here. I think they're 10mm hex from memory. There's a bolt down there as well. There is a third bolt. Looking up again, there's a third bolt here. There's another bolt here. I think that's all of them. yeah, I think there's 5 in total, so you should be able to find them pretty easy, guys. I shouldn't need to walk you through this much too much, but anyway, there's 5 bolts. We need to remove those, and then we'll be able to pull this out. Okay, once you've removed your battery box, put the bolts with it so you don't lose them and confuse them with other bolts. We can now get better access to the side brackets. Now before I touch these brackets, there's a couple of bolts which we'll go through in a sec. I'll show you where they are, but I won't remove them just yet. There is the main top bolt which will go through. Yours may look a little bit different to this. I think this one was redone with the radiator. Anyway, and there should be a rubber barrier protector between the frame here and the side of the radiator, or the back end of the radiator I should say. And that little rubber piece is integral just to stop the bashing metal against metal. And of course there'll be an L-shaped bracket you can see here. 1 bolt, 2 bolts, and a center bolt, and you obviously need to remove that as well. But I believe they're 10, possibly 12mm hex as well. But we won't do that just yet because of course we have a full tank of coolant which we need to drain. And in order to drain that, we're going to have to remove some hoses. Now, one thing you want to do is if you've just done brand new Toyota coolant like I did, which is quite expensive, you might want to be able to recycle that coolant. Make sure you filter it again, get any nasties out of it, but it means we're going to have to catch it without contaminating it into a bucket. And there's a few ways you can do that. I don't think there's any real amazing way to do it, just the best way to minimize it touching anything except a clean inside of a bucket without letting any dust or debris get into it as well, because you obviously don't want that going back into your radiator and back through your system. So one thing we should be doing is, under the car here, you'll see there is probably a bit dark down here, but I'll use my fingers to point out. We've actually got a bash plate here, and you'll see there's a bolt here, and then there should be side bolts as well over here just behind the strut, and there's another one on that side. And if you undo those 3, you might have 4 bolts. Then you'll be able to pull this bash plate out, and it'll actually give you better access directly underneath the vehicle to get to your hoses, belts, anything else, and that might save you from actually having to remove other parts like your belts and fan shroud, etc. But for this job, we're definitely going to remove this because we want to get access to that bottom radiator hose. So that'll be our next step, which we're going to do in a sec. Alright guys, so now obviously we're under the car right now and we're looking up. I've just removed that bash plate, which you can see here. It's pretty simple, 3 bolts in this one. Maybe there's a 4th that's missing, but anyway, I'll replace that if need be when I put it back on. So we're looking directly underneath between the radiator and the drive belts here, and you can see the radiator hose, which I just replaced as well, covered in coolant, so there was definitely a good leak through here. But what I really wanted to show you was being able to get access to, just if I can remove the light a little bit for you here, there's a hose clamp, you just see it behind those pipes there, which is the one that goes into the radiator, and of course there'll be another hose clamp right there which connects into the piping. Where are we? It just heads straight up there. Anyway, that's the hose clamp we're after, and that's the one I want to remove, and I'm going to quickly bend that hose over before I lose too much coolant and catch that into a bucket. I've just disinfected the bucket, cleaned it. There's not a drop of dust in this thing, so like I said, you want to make sure no contaminants get into here. So if you have any doubts, just replace your coolant completely. I'm just doing this because I've just literally put in $150 worth of this Toyota coolant, and I'd rather not spend another $150 if I don't need to. But of course, if there is any debris in there, you're going to run the risk of making a more expensive job out of it, so you're going to be extremely careful when doing it this way. And that's going to be our next step. We need to drain that before we can actually remove the radiator. So off we go. Okay, so as the last of the coolant drips out, you can probably hear it. We're going to move on to our other hoses while we wait. For all cars, including manual auto, you've got these 2 hoses here. Very simple, just undo that close handle, pull that out. Same deal with this one, you get the hose clamp and pull it out from there. I've obviously already done it. But for the automatic transmissions, you're going to have also 2 other lines, which you probably can't see too well, but you will need to get underneath the car in order to do these. they're the transmission cooling lines. There's two of them. There's one right next to the bottom hose there, and there is another one directly underneath this hose, straight down as well. And they're just little pliers to pinch the clips on them and pull them out. And you may see a little bit of trans fluid come out as you're doing that, so just be mindful of that. And once you're done, that's the hoses, and you're really left with the next stage, which will be dealing with the fan, because you won't be able to pull the shroud out here or the radiator without doing so. So we'll have to go into the fan next, which I'll do as soon as we've finished draining the coolant. Alright guys, so once you've got your coolant lines and transmission lines, if you've got the automatic, disconnected, and obviously we're ready to pull the shroud and the radiator out, we're going to need to actually remove the fan and the fan clutch inside the fan. So in order to do, you've got your 4 bolts here on the right here on the hubcap here, and you're going to need a 12mm size spanner to get on there. Now if you've got one of the ratcheting spanners, such as I've got here, these are quite good, except these ones are a little bit thick to fit between the, to get inside and get those things, so I'm going to have to do it manually with a 12mm standard ring spanner, and just crack one at a time, loosen them all up, and they come finger tight pretty quick. And then you're going to need to basically, you should hopefully just be able to pull yours out, but sometimes you might need to get a very fine flathead Phillips flathead screwdriver and just put it in between here, and you'll see there's like a line, and you might need to just put it in there and just lightly push into it and try and pry it away, because sometimes over time, if they haven't been opened up, they do seize up a little bit, as mine did the first time I did it, but now it should be pretty easy to pull off. So yeah, your belts will stay on, but they will come a little bit obviously loose on here, so it may pull just a little bit this way, but that's alright, because we're really just wanting to get the fan off so that we can pull the rest of this straight out, and you can't do that without removing the fan. Well, certainly not in this one, because the fan shroud will just catch it on the way up. So the fan's got to come out, and you should be able to get it out just by loosening up those bolts and pulling the fan out. Okay, once you've removed your fan here, as you can see, mine's just popped straight off, and as you can see, the belts are still lined on the pulley rods there. It's just obviously not tight and not on straight, but that's fine. We're just basically pushing it aside. You'll need to undo your shroud bolts. There should be one here and one here. Mine's broken, so I've been using a cable tie of recent, but I'm going to get that fixed. And then you'll be able to pull your shroud and your fan out at the same time and pull it out. I can't do it while I'm holding the phone, guys, but you get the picture. So hold onto the fan, hold onto the shroud, and pull them out. Right, so fan, shroud and the fan are out, and you can see all that red coolant, and there's a nice leaking patch right there as well, so there may actually be a core leak, or it may just have been some dripping effect, but I reckon there's a core leak there. Anyway, we're going to pull this out. So there's those transmission cooler lines that I was telling you about earlier. So how I've actually just pulled them off. They're just a pinch clip, and the same deal with that one. You can actually see the hose down there. Alright, now in order to get the thing out, as we were talking about, we've got some brackets and a bolt. There's one there, and there's the L-shaped bracket there. Again, I'm sure they were 10mm hex bolts. There should be 3 of them, and 3 on the other side, and that one there, which you're going to need to take off, which you may need to actually go through just next to your headlight assembly there. You may need to go under there in order to hold the bolt in with either a Phillips head screwdriver or a socket piece. It depends what's been installed in your vehicle, and that will basically allow you to pull the radiator out. Okay guys, so I've pulled the radiator out, and this is a very good example of why you do not buy cheap aftermarket Chinese products. It's just rubbish. Look at that, there's a leak there, apart from all the other possible leaks, definitely around the top tank there. So steer clear of it, guys. Buy only reputable brands that you know that are built for quality, basically. So we're talking the likes of Koyo, Adrad, T-Rad, Desert Coolers, J-Rad, I think it's called. Look, I'm sure there are others that are built locally or in Japan, but certainly just stick with OEM quality, guys. It's really not worth trying to save a few dollars using these cheap Chinese knockoffs. It's just crap. Shouldn't be allowed to sell them. It's quite dangerous actually. So anyway, this one's out, and follow the next video for the next stages of how to install and do belts, etc. Okay, so for those who need to replace their water pump, this is how you actually do it. Now, I've still got a belt here. This is actually a new belt that I've just put on, but I thought I'd just backtrack a stage just for those who do need to deal with their water pump. Now, remembering that this is the OEM, the one out the factory, and these things have got an incredibly long lifespan. Toyota built these things to last. So I really want to make it clear that you shouldn't need to replace this unless you may have a leaking gasket. Or let's just say your pump has gone, then you should aim to replace it with a factory one. Ison would be the one to go. There's a lot of aftermarket brands that you should stay clear of. The one that I actually ordered, I'll show you it over here. This is a GMB one. Now, these originally were made in Japan. It's a Japanese company. And I'm just going to show you the one in the packet here. This thing here, it looks pretty good, looks pretty solid. It is a direct replacement to go back in the engine there, but it is actually made in China now, so I will definitely not be putting that. I'd much rather run the original factory, which is actually in very good condition. I just replaced the gasket on it and I've whacked it back on. So anyway, we'll move on from the water pump, and we'll get back to the next stage, which is putting our belts back on. Now, much like when you remove your belts, you've got these torque loosening bolts that run through these pulley. There's one down here. Now, once you've loosened that off, you keep loosening it. It'll only adjust this pulley just a little bit, moving it up and down, which will allow you to loosen the belt up and then be able to pull it off, and the same to put it back on. You may need to loosen it up a little bit more to get the belt back on. You don't want to be sticking screwdriver handles and reefing these things back onto the pulleys. It's unnecessary. Don't do damage to your belts. Just loosen the thing up and tighten it back up when you're ready to go. And the same applies to the other two dry belts here that we'll be putting on as well. Difference being there that this running pulley here, this doesn't actually adjust up or down. The actual adjustment is on this side here of the alternator, which is exactly how we loosened it off. And I hope you can see that bolt. I'll try and get down a bit lower. There you go. That bolt there, same deal, just back and forth, and that will loosen up the tightness of the alternator onto your belts. And of course, you tighten them back up to the tightened strength when you're done. Now I'll do a little quick video again once I've finished putting these on, make a couple of quick points, and we'll move on to the next stage.